you.
Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy. Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this some new ice. Final Fantasy, change my religion just so I can do ice. Final Fantasy, that's an X spell. Final Fantasy, that's a sex spell. Got a Xanadu, you not family. I still be out here catching wrecks still. I cannot live if we gotta go. Fall back and really just know your bar. Watch out for demons that kingdom hearts. Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy. Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy.
Headshot. One enemy remaining.
Enemy spotted A. My ult's ready.
Spike planted.
Got one. Placing swarm grenade.
Final Fantasy, at the mercy. Foreign girl, yeah, she said mercy. I respect that. Final Fantasy, she said Uzi, can you fucking land at me? Pussy pink, I pull up in some fantasies. What I do, tell me why they mad at me. I can never hear what they be talking about, cause I'm probably on my Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy. Final Fantasy, got the strategy. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can stand up. Final Fantasy, she can laugh at me. Final Fantasy, this a new life. Final Fantasy, this a trilogy. Final Fantasy, this not moon rock. Body smoking on my latest enemy.
Spike planted.
Ultimate is ready. Finished.
One enemy remaining.
Stopped thinking clearly.